So big questions around March break. It is almost upon us and it's a busy travel season. But the spread of COVID-19 has many Canadians wondering if they're safe to travel. We've brought on CBC News medical contributor Dr. Peter Lynn to take us through some tips and some questions for those people who are contemplating that question. So let's start with what people can do, Dr. Lynn, to protect themselves when they're taking that flight.
Yeah, so basically they're saying that we shouldn't be flying into an area that already has the disease. So I think that's pretty obvious. However, if you're traveling somewhere else that doesn't have the disease, let's protect ourselves on the plane. So assume that the plane surfaces have viruses. In other words, lots of different viruses, because so far you've heard about patients being on the plane, but you've never heard about us cleaning the planes right after because they don't know that information until days later. So therefore, let's assume that there are viruses around the COVID-19. You've got influenza virus, all sorts of different things there. So let's just be careful with those areas. And so the idea is that the virus, the COVID-19 specifically, needs to get into your lungs. Okay, so it has a special key that can get into your body, but it only can work through your lungs. And so therefore it has to get to your lungs. And all viruses, they don't have feet or wings. So therefore they need our help. So that's why people sneezing, that's a great way for you to breathe it into your system because it needs to get into your lungs. The second thing is once the sneeze comes out, then it falls down onto the chairs and tables and everything else. And so now you can walk by and with your hands, you can touch it. And now you can pick up the virus onto your hand. So the second chance that the virus has to get into your system is from your hands. So when you bring your hands up to your face, and now all of a sudden the virus can get into your system. So that's why no hands to face is really important. I know that washing hands has been what we've been saying, but let's say you wash your hands and then you come back and you touch the chairs all the way back to your seat. You now have the virus on your hands. If you touch your face, now you're going to get the virus into your body. So perhaps no hands to face might be the important thing. I forgot though, you have to feed yourself. So therefore, when you're eating, we have to make sure we wash off our hands, wash off the virus, so that way the virus cannot come as we're eating our food as well.
And so you made it clear here that certainly you need to make sure that you're cleaning your hands and also your space as much as possible. There have been a lot of questions because you can't always get up and go and wash your hands every time you need to on a flight. There are, of course, limitations when the seatbelt sign is on, for example. So does having hand sanitizer handy and bringing portable wipes with you so you can clean your space, are those effective measures in trying to stop the spread and not have those germs come close to your mouth, as you're saying?
Yeah, so the bottom line is that yes, they will be helpful, but then unfortunately we rely on that too much. We'll say, well, I use my hand sanitizer, that's great, but then you touch something else. You're not using it, the hand sanitizer again. So now you have virus on your hands and then up to your face. So the bottom line is, let's say you can't get off the seat, your seatbelt in, then just don't touch your hands to your face. Remember, these viruses, they can't get through your skin. So there's no way that the virus can hurt you through your skin or anything else. It can't go through your hair or anything like that. It can only go through this particular area. So as long as we remember that, the virus is actually quite weak and needs us to move it to the right place. Then that way we don't freak out. So the idea is that, yes, we want you to be clean, but we don't want you to be sort of so freaked out that you can't travel, that you can't enjoy yourself on your trip.
And, you know, because so much of the advice is also developing and evolving as we are watching the spread and we're learning more information about the coronavirus, initially, doctors, health practitioners certainly advise that really you don't need to wear a mask. This is something that particularly doctors who are in close proximity with those suffering from the virus or who are displaying symptoms should be wearing. But still, you board any plane, you're watching people, whether it's the N95 mask or it's a surgical mask, they are donning those masks. So is that advisable, given the sort of example you're given of how it is transmitted? Is that advisable or not?
Yeah, so right now we still think it's droplet based, which means those big droplets are coming out. They don't go very far. So that's why public health always says sort of 6 feet away. So when they're contact tracing, they're tracing people 6 or 3 rows ahead, 3 rows behind. And that's the reason why, because these droplets fall out. So this is not a virus that floats in the air. I think people think that it floats in the air and I'm just going to, open anything and I'm going to be breathing it in. So it does not float in the air. It will fall out into the droplet form. In terms of the mask, what they really do is they stop your hands from touching touching your face. Really, that's all they do. So they're leaky from the side, so they will not stop everything. And so the reason why we wear them still is because it stops us from touching our face. And number two is that when we get very close, it'll cut down a little bit of contact, but it certainly does not cut down the virus going through the mask itself. If you are sick, then we want you to wear a mask so that you don't spew the virus everywhere. So that's really containment of the virus. And the reason why we're saying this is because there's been a run on masks. So therefore, everybody's been buying boxes of masks. And so now hospitals and everybody are having a shortage. So now the real people that need it won't be able to access it. So for the majority of people, if you want to think about that mask as being just something that stops you from touching your face, that might be a useful thing. So you don't need boxes and boxes of these things to be carried around with you all the time.
All right, and another question that a lot of people have is, of course, March break means a lot of children will be traveling too. A lot of parents have questions about their kids. Typically, we know that children can be included, particularly infants in vulnerable populations, the elderly and the very young. So how is this particular virus, what have we seen about how it impacts children?
Yeah, so influenza and things like that, little children and old people, basically, they're the ones that suffer the most. In this particular case, for some reason, 44,000 patients they published from the China database, the number of kids underneath 9 years old was only 400 something. So around 1% of the patients were actually children. So for some reason, children are being spared. Maybe that little key system doesn't work so well, so the virus can't get into the cells in the kids. So we don't exactly sure why that is, but the number of kids that are getting it is small, and they don't seem to get the severe diseases. In other words, they don't get the super sick, bad lung disease, which means that maybe it's your immune system that's doing something. In other words, can't fight it off, so then your immune system sort of throws everything at it. Whereas in kids, their immune system isn't that great, so therefore they don't have a whole lot to throw at it, and so therefore they don't destroy the lung area. So thankfully, it's relatively low numbers in kids, and they don't get the severe disease. Can they transmit it? The answer is yes. So they can get sick. They can then pass it on to parents and so on and so forth. So they can still be a vector to transmit, but certainly they are not the ones that are the bulk of the people that are getting sick right now, which is a good blessing.
And now finally, I wanted to ask you just for a bit of a reality check here. It's interesting because I've noticed certainly in the course of the past few weeks of interviewing different doctors, epidemiologists about this, that the tone has somewhat changed as more information is coming out. So I'm wondering, in terms of the mortality rate, about the severity of this particular coronavirus, we've heard some people even compare it to the Spanish flu. So what sort of severity should we be watching this with? What sort of precautions or level of precautions should we be taking in order to be safe? And at what point is it panic? That's unnecessary.
Yeah, I think this is a new virus, and it's kind of creepy, right? Because every day you watch the news and it's coming closer and closer. It's like this disease that's creeping up on you. So two things, that it is a new virus. It does have a mortality rate around 2 to 3%. So it's not the highest. So SARS was more like 9% and MERS was more like 40%. So these are much bigger. However, having said that, we don't need any new viruses to come into the system. And the worry that we have is if we start passing it within our community. Right now, it's pretty obvious. Somebody comes in from another country and they have it, and we can capture them and isolate them. But now we're going to have people flying within the domestic area, and those planes might be a little bit contaminated. So therefore, you're now sitting in a seat that somebody else sat in, and so on and so forth. So now we might have some local transmission of this as well. Once local transmission happens, their worry is this virus going to stay so that next year it's going to come, and the year after that, and the year. So now it becomes part of our staple of viruses. Then we're going to have a lot more people being affected. And so that's the concern that the public health have right now, is that will we have this local transmission in case if we can't contain it right now. So that's why they're working very hard to find everybody, to make sure that we don't get sick. And number two is stop this from becoming a yearly thing. SARS was a one-time, right? We don't see it every single year, and MERS is a one-time. So what we need to do is make this COVID-19 a one-time, and then that way we won't be seeing this thing coming back and forth. And all those things that we talked about, the virus can't move and all those things, it's things that you and I can do. In other words, you and I stop our hands going up to our face and things like that. And it's us doing those things that will stop this. It's not some big fancy body that will say, this is what we're going to do. It's you and I making those simple steps, because once the virus does not have a host, it cannot make photocopies of itself. And once it can't make photocopies of itself, the virus dies. And so therefore, the power is within you and I doing this very simple things in terms of no hands to face, no shaking, and so on and so forth, that will actually stop the virus in its tracks.
And in terms of also what people can do, you and I just want to make a final point to our viewers. I think you touched on it. Usually Dr. Lin is here in studio with us. He's staying home because he's feeling sick. So that is another thing that people can do. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Lin, for all of your advice today. That is CBC News medical contributor Dr. Peter Lin in Toronto.